It started as the kind of day no one remembers, a day of scraping paint off metal and the faint smell of turpentine clinging to the air. She was on base, wearing worn-out jeans and a faded t-shirt, a brush in one hand, a bucket at her side. To everyone else, she was just another civilian contractor, someone hired to fix up the barracks and leave unnoticed. But then, without warning, the entire atmosphere shifted. A Navy SEAL walked by, silent, sharp, carrying the kind of weight in his eyes only combat could give a man. He stopped mid-step, frozen, his gaze locked not on her face, but on the tattoo, wrapping around her wrist. It was as if time itself had snapped. And in that fragile, loaded silence, two worlds that had been drifting separately suddenly collided in a way neither of them could have prepared for. Stay with me, because what happened next would not only change his life, but hers forever. She noticed his pause before she noticed his eyes. The brush hung midair as she looked down at her wrist, confused, wondering what he was staring at. The tattoo wasn't anything special, at least not to the outside world. Just a series of numbers and letters woven together with a small anchor drawn beneath. To her, it was memory inked into skin, a scar and a symbol both. To him, it was a ghost. The seal didn't move. He didn't blink. He just breathed out once, almost like a man trying to stop himself from falling apart in broad daylight. She shifted, uncomfortable, the weight of his stare pressing down. And then his voice, low, careful, almost breaking. "Where did you get that?" Her lips parted, words catching in her throat. Few people ever asked. Fewer understood. But something in his tone carried more than curiosity. It carried recognition. She swallowed and said softly, "My brother." It was his. The brush slipped from her fingers and clattered against the bucket, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. He stepped closer, each footfall deliberate, his chest rising and falling as though he'd just run miles though he was only standing. Still that he lifted a hand, hesitated, then pointed, not touching, just pointing, to the small numbers etched in black. "Those numbers," he said, his voice ragged. That's a unit call sign." She nodded slowly, tears pricking the edges of her eyes, because she had heard it before, years ago, whispered in the dim kitchen light by her brother before he left for deployment and never came home. He had told her if she ever wanted to carry a piece of him forever, that call sign was it. The SEAL's throat tightened as if he was swallowing stones. What was his name, he asked. And when she told him, his entire face broke open. For a moment, silence carried more weight than words. His eyes glistened, his jaw locked, his fists unclenched and clenched again. Then he whispered something she could barely catch. "I was there." The ground seemed to slip beneath her feet. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she tried to process what he meant. But the look in his eyes told her, this wasn't just a stranger recognizing a tattoo. This was a man carrying a story, one she hadn't known she was ready to hear. And suddenly, the paint, the brush, the barracks, all of it faded. Only his voice mattered now. He told her about the mission, his words slow and heavy, as if dragging them out of the mud of memory. Her brother had been more than a name on a wall, more than a folded flag handed to grieving hands. He was the man who had saved lives in the dead of night, who had cracked jokes even in gunfire, who had carried others when he could barely carry himself. The SEAL's voice trembled as he spoke, his composure breaking in waves, and she felt her own tears spill, not from grief this time, but from an aching, overwhelming pride. She had never known these details. Her brother had been her protector, her best friend, but here he was painted in colors she'd never seen, through the eyes of someone who had fought beside him. And then came the confession, sharp as a blade. "He saved me," the SEAL whispered. "That night, when everything went wrong. I should have been the one who didn't make it out. But he pushed me out of the line of fire. He took it instead." His breath caught, and for the first time, she saw a warrior stripped bare, haunted, and human. Every day since, I've carried that. The weight, the guilt. And then, I saw that tattoo, and it felt like he was standing here again. Her hand trembled as she covered the ink, tears streaking her cheeks. For so long, she had worn the tattoo for herself, for memory, for grief, for the empty chair at Thanksgiving and the silence that never left their house. She never imagined it could become a bridge to someone else's broken heart. She looked at him and whispered, "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." His shoulders sagged as if she had just lifted 100 pounds off him. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and when he opened them again, the steel in his gaze had softened, replaced by something fragile, almost boyish, like he was remembering what it felt like to breathe without guilt crushing his chest. "Thank you," he said, voice cracking. 2 words, but they held years of pain, gratitude, and release. The days that followed didn't erase their grief, but they began stitching something together. He visited her while she painted, sometimes silent, sometimes sharing stories of missions and memories, always circling back to her brother. She listened, soaking in every word, every glimpse of who her brother had been when he was far from home. And in return, she told him about their childhood, the pranks he played, the way he burned pancakes every Saturday morning, the little quirks no battlefield could ever capture. Piece by piece, they rebuilt a man neither of them could fully bring back, but both of them could keep alive. There were nights he couldn't sleep, shadows of the past clawing at him. She learned to sit with him in those silences, the tattoo on her wrist a silent promise that her brother's sacrifice wasn't forgotten, that his story lived on in both of them. And in time, something unexpected bloomed. Not romance, not yet, but something deeper. A bond forged not in blood but in shared grief, in the delicate balance of memory and healing that on the final day of her contract, when the barracks doors gleamed with fresh paint, he found her standing in the hallway one last time. The sun slanted through the windows, painting everything gold. He reached for her wrist, not to question, not to ache, but to honor. His thumb brushed lightly against the ink, and he said, he would be proud of you, of this. She smiled through tears, her heart aching but full. For the first time since her brother's death, she didn't feel alone in remembering him. As she walked away, leaving the bucket and brushes behind, she felt lighter. Not because the grief was gone, it never truly leaves, but because it had been shared. And behind her, the seal stood still, watching, a man finally allowed to let go of some of the ghosts he'd been carrying. Their lives had crossed by chance, on a quiet day in a painted hallway. But in that chance, they had found something rare and lasting. The kind of connection that turns pain into purpose, loss into legacy. And that's why sometimes the smallest details, a tattoo, a glance, a pause in an ordinary day, can change everything. Because what looks like coincidence is often the beginning of healing. And when two broken hearts recognize each other, they don't just remember the past, they begin to rebuild the future.